Hey, everybody. Mark and I have over 20 years of experience as therapists and as addicts in long-term successful recovery. We know better than anyone what works and what doesn't to break out of porn and sex addiction, heal betrayal trauma, and reclaim your relationship.
And we've poured all of our personal and professional recovery and healing experience into a first-of-its-kind program for addicts, spouses, and couples. We call it Dare to Connect.
At least 4 times every week, we engage with you in real time, in the trenches, giving you the knowledge and the tools to take back your life and relationship.
Whatever else you've done on your journey for healing and recovery, you've never done anything like this.
Mark and I, we've made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. Don't reinvent the wheel.
We all know tomorrow never comes. Look, don't wait one more day to change. Claim your free 2-week trial today at daretoconnectnow.com.
Hey everybody, I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSE Squared podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to the PBSE podcast. It's great to be with all of you today. We are coming at you with episode number 238. We were presenting to a group earlier today, right before recording this, and I don't know why I hadn't thought about this. For some reason, I'd been operating, my head was telling me like we'd done the podcast for a couple of years, but we do an episode a week, and it's episode 238. So, and I remember we started it in our first podcast was the first week of January, and this upcoming January, that will have been 5 flipping years ago.
Oh, that's unbelievable.
That is, I can't believe it. That's unreal. We just appreciate all of you and your patronage. So
all you listening, you're awesome.
You are. You guys are outstanding. So anyway, just crazy. So anyway, episode 238. And this is a question that was submitted to us. Title, as you can see, is for an addict seeking to overcome quote unquote public scanning, is the quote unquote 3-second rule harmful or helpful? It's a great question. Many of you are familiar with this. We'll talk about it, and then we'll talk about the origins of this a little bit, probably what it was intended to do, and give you some thoughts on it. And this is what this partner says that submitted this in. Can you both talk about the 3-second rule and why it is not an okay rule? Many people talk about it and or say that they've read, heard, or had addicts, partners, therapists suggest this as a rule. I love the way you've described, and she goes on. She's heard us present before. She's actually a member of Dare to Connect as well. I've loved the way that you've described in D2C what a crappy rule it is. And then she goes into some of the things that we'll talk about today. She says, but I can't recall that you've ever actually talked about that on the PBC podcast before. I think it would be a great idea. I think it could help so many people to know that it's not a good rule or a way to avoid scanning and objectifying, and that using tools like mindfulness and having a plan before going out and about for each and every action throughout the day is a better plan. I know the scanning and objectifying podcast helps with this, so she's referencing a past episode. But I think covering that blasted quote unquote rule specifically would also be helpful. So we thought it'd be good to talk about this today.
It would be, and I have some interesting history in my own personal life about this 3-second rule. It's sort of it was probably the precursor to the 3-second rule. I'll tell you how it went. And this is what was taught to me when I was a teenager. And I have a religious background, a Christian background. And here's essentially what grown-ups told me. Mark, if you don't look once, you're not a man. If you look twice, you're not a Christian.
Yeah.
That's how the original rule was taught to me.
Yes.
And so I got really good as a teenager at looking like taking a lot in the one look, because if you don't look once, in quotes, you're not a man, right?
Yes.
Don't dare look twice. So you can see how this just gets completely off the track.
Yeah.
Of what the intent is, of what's healthy, of where my my desires are, my mind is. It's just, there's just so many things wrong with this. And then of course what came out of that sort of original was this crazy 3-second rule. Right? As long as you're not engaged in the scanning thing for more than 3 seconds, right? Then you're working on it. You're doing okay. And then I saw guys adjust the 3-second rule. Well, Mark, 3 seconds means the first second you notice, the second second, you're kind of moving your mind or your brain, and the third second you're re-engaging with something else. That's the 3-second rule. So I've heard lots of versions of this.
Yeah. And so we probably should talk about that, right? Some of you may not even know what this is, so we'll just talk about it for 2 seconds. So the 3-second rule is kind of this idea that is floated around the halls of addiction recovery in the sexual addiction world, probably for forever, right?
Right.
The exact origins of it will remain forever unknown. But yeah, as we've been talking about, is the idea denotes is that you should never be looking for longer than 3 seconds. Why did this become a thing over the years? That probably for a lot of reasons, right? There is it kind of, like Mark said, it's sort of is that spin-off of, you don't look once, you're not a man, you don't look twice, blah, 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 blah. Right. It probably came off of this notion of thinking that, well, you're a guy, so it's human to look, but just don't do it for very long. Or more importantly, I think the logic was if you don't look for very long, then you won't do it in an inappropriate way.
Right.
Right. That's probably the baseline logic, right? But behind it is if we limit the time for how long you look at someone you find attractive, or you limit that lust to instantaneous effect, then that's going to somehow mitigate how bad that could be. And I suppose,
and you have to admit that it's simple.
Sure, it's
direct. It isn't entirely dismissible. There is some value to it at a really crazy basic level, right, of recovery or healthy living. It's really, really, really at the base level. So it's not like we dismiss it altogether, but it's more symptom treating or symptom management versus real recovery and real change.
Well, yeah, for sure, right? It's not actually a shift in thinking. It was, again, just based on this. I think it was the part of the problem is it's based on this flawed notion that 3 seconds somehow is not long enough for serious lust to encroach in the addict brain.
Oh, man.
So Mark and I will now expand on that for all of you, because as recovering addicts, we can tell you with an unequivocal certainty there are some problems with this rule. And the first one goes into what I'm going to talk about for a second. 3 seconds is a long time for an addict.
Well, if we're talking addicts, 1 second, 1/4 of a second is a long time.
It is.
If your intention and what you're about is in the wrong space.
Exactly. If I am in a lust-based mode, right? If I am in a seeking mode or a hunting mode, right? Whatever you want to call it. And I am on the prowl for those kinds of things.
I'm in a self-medicating mode.
That's a good way to put it.
In an escape mode. Yeah.
Very, very, 3 seconds is a lifetime in the world of an addict. A lot can happen in that kind of time. And so this notion that 3 seconds would somehow limit that, well, it's understandable. It isn't correct. And that's probably the first problem.
Right.
And there are other issues with it though, too. I know that, I can't speak for every addict on the planet, but I can definitely tell you for how my brain works whenever I used to hear these kinds of things. I would hear things like a 3 second rule. And so I would think to myself, oh, so I have 3 seconds then. That was my notion.
Yeah, I have 3. Yeah, it's
like giving permission.
Yeah,
right. That's what it is.
That's what the wording I was trying to find. It was giving you permission.
Yeah, this is okay as long as I engage in this for 3 seconds. But I can't even tell you how much of my addiction and Mark's addiction was made up historically out of quote unquote 3-second instances, right?
Or like we said, 1-second instances, or right.
Absolutely.
Or
Absolutely.
or we didn't even have to see anything because we had a ready-made storage facility in our brains already.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there is another problem with this, and this actually is rooted in baseline psychology. Okay. The problem with the 3-second rule is that it focuses a lot on the don'ts and not enough on the
Yeah.
do's.
What I'm going to not do, stop doing, avoid doing, stay away from, versus what I'm going to move toward, engage in, do. Yeah, you're right. Huge. That's a very important distinction.
Well, and there's been a lot of research over the years and even books written on this topic that has, from a psychological perspective, that have proven when you tell a person to not focus on something, the brain's inherent tendency, either out of curiosity or out of an effort to not focus on that thing, does what? It focuses on that thing, right? By definition, it's placing some emphasis on it. And so this really what we have here, it's almost like an extension of the old style of how old school psychology, when you would approach addiction, so much of the focus was placed just on the abstinence, right? Just on the don't do it.
Don't. And I remember in early recovery, or even before I got into, quote, classic recovery, when I really did try to fight this because I had a value system somewhere deep inside me. I remember going into public spaces where what was the thought process going through my head? Don't look, don't look, don't look, don't look,
Yes.
don't look.
Totally.
Closing, look at your feet, look at the sky, right? Clench your fists, go to war. And boy, if you even study basic classic obsessive compulsive models, anything that I resist and go to war with will eventually do what? Wear me out and exhaust my limited willpower reserves. Until then, what will I do? I'll go seek that thing to get relief from the battle.
Yeah.
And now I'm in an obsessive compulsive trap.
Yes.
Boy, did that describe me for decades.
Well, and I think if you even, and that is so true. And I think, just to even add to that, for many of us addicts, why do we even engage with lust or have a relationship with lust, a toxic relationship with lust in the first place? As a way to escape.
Yeah.
As a way to avoid. So what we've taught in these old school halls of, again, thinking was that the way to not engage in toxic behavior was to focus on yet even more don'ts. And that's part of the problem, right?
Yes.
As Mark said a minute ago, a real recovery. Now it's true that don'ts are a part of a quote balanced recovery
They
diet.
are.
Okay, they are.
Right? In early recovery, don't we often we start with the don'ts at a really basic level, right?
But you have to progress very quickly. If recovery is going to be sustainable, it has to be focuses on what do we do, right? And that applies to everything from the surrender process. What are we going to replace the things that we're surrendering with, ranging up through, okay, I know what my marriage doesn't want. I don't want my marriage to be. Well, what the hell do I want it to be? Right? That's another focus to, let's just look at the individual for us addicts, right? Every guy that's listening to this podcast, I guarantee you, he's listening to this because at least in part, he's focused on I don't want my life to be like it is. Last night in one of our Dare to Connect support groups, I showed a brief vignette from the opening scene of the Omaha Beach scene in Saving Private Ryan. And there's a line in that beginning scene where someone is yelling at Captain Miller, one of the main characters of the movie. They're on the beach, gunfire's everywhere. It's terribly graphic. It's a terribly graphic, very well depicted, horrible scene because it was a horrible time. And someone's yelling at Captain Miller and he says, "Where is the rally point?" Meaning, where do we go? Like, right? They're all hunkered behind these little barricades on the beach, gunfire pouring everywhere, bombs going off. And not Private Ryan, excuse me, Captain Miller says, "Anywhere but here."
Anywhere but here.
And and we talked about that last night in our support group as part of this idea that every addict can relate to that notion. I don't even know what I want my life to look like, right? But I do know one thing. I want it to not be this. I want it to not be what it's become.
Yeah, and our betrayed partners would probably come into this conversation and see the same thing. Absolutely. I don't know exactly what I want him to become. I just want him to quit being that guy.
I know this isn't working. I know that, and not even just that guy. I know I don't know what marriage I signed up for exactly, but this isn't it.
Yeah, this isn't it.
This isn't the relationship I signed up for. This is not what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so this idea, so it does continue to kind of emphasize, right? Again, things that we're just abstaining from rather than trying to focus on, well, okay, so where are we going?
Right. Because one is based on just focusing on symptoms versus getting to real lasting change.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's change the conversation a little bit. One, we would recommend that, yes, you get rid of that 3-second rule for all you addicts out there as quickly as possible. Like we've worked with lots of guys over the years. And first of all, if it has worked for you to some degree, which it did for us as well, we applaud that. Right. Yeah. And if that was a starting point, mazel tov, that's fine. But it cannot be a part of a long-term recovery approach if you're going to.
And even if you've adjusted it to where it's, 1,000, I do this, 2,000, I do this, and 3,000, I do that. That's better than just don't look more than 3 seconds. That's an improvement. But we hope that you'll even go far beyond that. And this is where we talk about, okay, so what do I do? What do I do
instead? Right.
Well, we said instead, but what do I do that's more advanced, more mature, more effective? How do I go beyond that simplistic approach?
Well, and the first thing that we had written down when we were getting ready to do this today, Mark, and this is your bullet point, and I know you're good at talking about this, it's this whole concept of checking your intention at the door.
Oh my gosh. I cannot begin to tell you how all things begin with my intent. How many times did we as addicts, long before we were going to go into a public space, the mall, the swimming pool, the beach, the restaurant, how often did the addict brain begin to do its pre-planning about its intent for going into that public space? Even very subtly, right? Who we might see, what we might get to look at, what it might be, right? Intention, intention, intention. You've got to start there. What is my intention well before I go into this public space? Why am I going to be there? What am I here for? That has to be the starting place.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I'd agree. Well, because that's where it does begin, right? And a lot of what we're going to talk about here for the rest of the podcast today centers on this idea, right? Like, what am I really doing? I mean, this is really a subset of what we talk about oftentimes in Dare to Connect and on here as well, which is shifting out of that emotional cruise control that everyone is vulnerable to.
Am I reactive or am I proactive?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, all of us are vulnerable to this, to the emotional cruise control component, right? We all have crazy busy lives. We all have lots going on. We live in the loudest, busiest, noisiest, most distracted world in the history of humankind.
Yeah.
Right. And it requires more effort now than ever before in history to remain focused on something.
I agree.
Right. And so this intentional piece is more important now than it ever has been before. So let's look at this, right? So yeah, like Mark said, what am I here for? Right? What is the purpose? And that can apply to anything. If I'm hopping on the computer, being on the computer is not inherently a problem. Unless you're hopping on there just to chill for an addict, especially in early recovery, right? Going out with friends isn't inherently a problem. Again, unless you don't have some sort of a setup for success, right? We can just kind of go down the list there. So actually asking yourself, what is the reason behind why I'm doing what I'm doing? We call that mindfulness. Is the first step with this.
Because what can we say will keep one of the things that will keep us stuck in addiction than any other is to go into any setting without a purpose.
Yes.
Without a predetermined intention. You're just right. If you're just I'm just going to show up. Well, we'll just go with the flow. That's addiction death.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. I mean, that going with the flow, what's the flow? The subconscious brain flow for an addict is the path of least resistance, which is inevitably leading to acting out at some point in that process. Yep. Okay. So let's talk about specific boots on the ground. How do we do this? These are things that we've talked about before, but we will keep talking about because they remain just as important now as then. Planning in advance, right? We know that sounds so simplistic, but how often do we skip it?
Planning.
Right?
How
I
many
mean,
times,
how often do
Steve,
we do that?
have we asked our addicts, what is your plan? Hey, Mark, Steve, I got a business trip coming up. I'm really worried about it. And that was our first
Okay.
question.
Yeah.
What's your
Okay.
plan?
So what does that look like? What does your day look like? Oh, well, it's a business conference. Okay. So again, what does that look like? Right. You can see how we sometimes have to navigate through these
Yeah.
multiple layers of kind of getting down to okay, you're asking like what the schedule is. Okay. Well, this is when the conference start, right? And then that's where
And
we start
are
to
you
look.
just going to show up, or are you going to prepare?
Yeah, no, absolutely, right? Because if you're going to plan in advance, it's important to look and be realistic with whatever environment you're going into, right? I will give you a case in point example with this from a non-lust based perspective, because what we're talking about right now doesn't just apply to lust, although it applies equally there too. Any highly triggering environment. When I historically, especially earlier on in recovery, during some of the many difficulties I had with Brittany's family of origin and with my in-laws, it took a lot of planning on my end to successfully have a good trip there.
Yeah.
If I didn't make plans for that, everything from resentment towards Brittany to quiet the whole time to anger and frustration to probably a fight between the two, all these things where it was just a setup for that every time.
Yeah.
Right? There would have to be a lot of
I'm headed
planning.
into in-law territory. I think I'll wing it.
Yeah. How many times? It's gone horribly the last 35 times, but surely this time it will be fine.
I know, right?
No, right? So I would have a plan. Sometimes that would even include something as extreme as a backup. There were many times at the beginning, and it still happens today, where we will deliberately take two separate cars.
Yep.
Right? So having some sort of plan. What will I do when? And not if, okay? When? When the triggers come. Right? If I'm an addict and I'm going to the mall in the middle of summertime, let's be real for a minute. It's not a question of if I'm going to be sexually triggered. It's just a question of when and how much and why. Right? So if I'm real about that and honest about that, then it would behoove me then to say, okay, first of all, I guess you have to be real with it, right? But then the second piece is, given those factors, what am I going to need to do? And that can involve everything from the environment. Should we even go to the mall?
Should we even go?
Is this even something that is this the right call? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We don't know. Right. If so, what are the ways in which we could stay safe? Right. And then you start drilling down and looking at that. Right. And that can also include, who am I going with? Right. Who's going to be there with me? Because remember, guys, this recovery process isn't just strictly about the lust. Again, I'll give you another example. It's about the connection side. If you're going to be there with your partner, it isn't just a question of how do I keep myself safe and free of lust, or have good tools going in and a successful plan for sobriety and staying in a good headspace. How do I maintain good connection in my coupleship? How do I lead out in my partnership to create a safe space for my partner as well?
Am I practicing and becoming familiar with and really becoming progressively better at being fully present?
Yes.
With who I'm with, right? I have a saying that goes through my head on a regular daily basis. I'll give it to everybody listening. Mark, be here, be now. Be here, be now, right? Because I have an ADD brain that wants to go off on all sorts of tangents, not just lust, but all sorts of things that takes me away from where I am and who I'm with.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. I love that. Now, part of a good plan should be creating. Now, notice I when I was typing this, full disclosure, when we were doing this before, I was writing something else down instead of creating, but I said it was something along the lines of like try to have easy access to centering resources. And I deleted that out and I wrote create easy access to centering resources. We, like we talked about before, we live in the most disconnected emotionally, but also electronically and otherwise connected world ever that the world has ever known. When I go anywhere virtually these days, I have like multiple points of access if I'm willing to follow through with them, for accessing recovery resources on the go anywhere I am.
Yep.
A good go-to would be a daily renewal partner, somebody that you can call or reach out to. Sponsor can be something similar to that. But it even goes far beyond that, right? Making a reach out text if you can't make a phone call right in the moment. I have gone and been in public before in triggering situations. I'll give you another example. You know what one of the most triggering things for me used to be, and I know many addicts are going to relate to this, it was just going to bed.
Yes.
I'm tired. I'm sleepy.
Yes.
My brain associates sexual activity with the evening. My wife's already in bed or going to sleep or not in the mood, or we're not in a safe space to have sex or whatever, right? I'm feeling avoidant of tomorrow's responsibilities. You can see how all these are a recipe for problems,
Yes.
right? And so what would I do? I would put an earbud in. I would literally call one of the 12-step meetings that I knew was going on at the time. I'd put it on mute and I would fall asleep with people talking about recovery in my ear.
I love that. And right, this is where we talk about making technology, which is the enemy, your addiction, taking that technology and making it your friend and your support. Yes. Right? There's a 12-step meeting going on virtually every hour somewhere in the world, 24/7.
Yes,
right?
There is.
I love that.
Absolutely. I mean, as we say in Dare to Connect all the time, if you're going to get screwed over by the technology and it's going to hold you hostage, well, weaponize the same thing that's been holding you hostage, right?
Yeah,
I mean, how can we leverage these things?
Be held hostage by my friends.
Gosh. So, right. So that can be those things, all those kinds of things can be helpful, but it goes even beyond that, right? It's all the recovery tools that we teach in Dare to Connect, that you learn on this podcast, that we learn in therapy or in other venues like 12-step tools like surrender, right?
Yes.
Surrender, we have done and we'll probably do more podcasts on that concept alone. The idea of empathy. Obviously, we don't have time. We're wrapping up the podcast here today. We don't have time to go into it. But empathy is one of the most powerful tools against lust, because true empathy means truly humanizing another person.
Seeing a whole person, all of who they are, not just a few of the parts. It's a small piece of who they are. You know, when you said surrender, I'll tell you that one of the things that I worked hard to become hyper aware of. Now it's called FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. And I would go into public spaces with this fear of missing out, right? Who could I see? Who could I get a glimpse of? Who could I whatever? And practicing the surrender of FOMO. I am willingly giving away to my higher power my fear of missing out. Here, take it. I'm letting it go. And now I'm with that gone. Now, what do I need most in this moment? That's off the table. I surrendered it. Oh, I remember why I'm here. I remember the plan I have for being here. And I'm going to actively engage in that right now because I gave FOMO away. Right? I love that.
Absolutely. It's all about coming back to connecting with that authentic self we're trying to bring outside, right? Mm-hmm. He always is wanting to go inside for different reasons. Fear, shame, threat, insecurity, right? And it's always one of the main battles of this recovery process is bringing the authentic side out, right? Connecting with, accessing that component.
Bringing my whole self to an environment and then engaging as my whole self with the whole selves of others.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, guys, there's lots more we could say on this subject, but we appreciate the little mini dive that you did with us on this topic of the 3-second rule today. That little, it's like one of those little buzzwords that just buzz phrases that floats around the recovery community.
All over the place. I know.
We love tackling topics like this with you. Please don't be a stranger. If you'd like to have a topic covered on the podcast, albeit briefly, you're welcome to send those in to pbsepodcast.com. There's also an ever-glowing blog there that Mark is kind enough to upload with search terms relating to all of our podcast episodes thus far. So we have nearly 5 years of access to podcast resources there as well.
Just go into the blog and click on the little magnifying glass and put a search term in.
Absolutely.
Stuff come up.
And if you really want to level your recovery up to the next level, we are coming up. I was just thinking about this the other day. 4th of July is already passed. We're coming up on the holiday season. It's shockingly close.
At the end of the year holiday season.
Yes, exactly. I remember distinctly as an addict and being in the headspace about this time of year thinking, how do I make this my last year in this mess?
Oh, all the time, right? And the New Year's resolution time is going to be coming in 5 months or so.
Yes.
I'll get serious then. This time I'm really going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guys, and partners. What if you as an addict, what if you as a partner, what if your relationship could be free of this mess or have it greatly under control and greatly alleviated this coming Christmas? What if you could spend the holidays addicts free of shame? What if partners, you could experience more trust in your partner during the holiday season than you ever have before? That is possible. We hope that you will come and give Dare to Connect a try. We have a free 2-week trial for that. You can find that at daretoconnectnow.com. You could wait till January 1st to do that, and we'll probably still be doing that trial then. Or you could make the better decision and start it today so that you don't have to wait till that next year to have a good year. So
I love that. Great point.
All right, everybody. Well, have a great rest of your day. We appreciate and love all of you. Thank you so much for your patronage, and like I said, for making this this podcast what it is. We truly do appreciate all of you and the feedback that we get from you. And please do reach out to us with questions, comments, new topics at the submission or the contact form on pbscpodcast.com at the bottom.
All right, everybody. Hey, take care, and we will see you in our next episode.
Bye-bye.
Everything expressed on the PBSE podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.